This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day wherever you're listening from, and welcome to episode 460 of IAQ Radio. This is Friday, May 19th, 2017, and this week we welcome Rachel Gutter, Chief Product Officer of the International Well Building Institute. We're going to talk about the well building standard and looking forward to an interesting discussion. But before we get started, we have to thank our marquee sponsors.
IAQ Radio marquee sponsors are John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at jondon.com. That's JONDON.com. Healthy Indoor Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions are available at IAQ.net. Legends Environmental Insurance, the experts in insurance for environmental consultants and contractors for over 20 years at legends-enviro.com. That's legends-enviro.com.
Please be sure to thank our sponsors for their support of IAQ Radio when you inquire about their services or products. And last but not least, please visit the IAQ Training Institute website for the most current dates for the training you trust at iaqtraining.com. Also, you can have a look at the Healthy Building Summit coming up less than 6 months away now. Let's turn it over to the Z-Man for today's IAQ Radio trivia question.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick@cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man with this week's IAQ Radio Trivia question.
I'm sorry to report there was no correct answer to our last IQ Radio Trivia question. The IQ Radio Trivia question for today, May 19, 2017, has been sponsored by Ideas, a solution chemistry company, creating unique solutions to odor removal, surface cleaning, and decontamination problems. Now for today's IQ Radio Trivia question. What is the focus of the well building standard? Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Cliff. Okay, so this week we're going to talk about the well building standard, and our guest is Rachel Gutter. She's the Chief Product Officer for the International Well Building Institute. She joined the International Well Building Institute in late 2016. I hope I have that right, Rachel, as Senior Vice President, bringing with her a wealth of cross-cutting experience in safer, healthier environments where they matter the most, in school rooms across the globe. She joined the International Well Building Institute after a 9-year career at the U.S. Green Building Council, where she founded the Center for Green Schools. And I learned in the lead up to the show, she was a school teacher prior to that, so we have a similar background. She's a widely sought-after expert and inspiring speaker. The rallying cry of "Where Our Children Learn Matters" caught the imagination of the New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, Parenting Magazine, Fox News, and CNN, among hundreds of other news outlets. In 2012, she received the World Green Building Council's Chairman's Award and was honored by Martha Stewart's Whole Living magazine as an eco-heroine in 2011. Good day. Rachel, do we have you on the line?
Sure do. Welcome.
Great to have you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, great to be with you.
So, did I have that right? You started with the International Well Building Institute in 2016?
That's correct. Okay. Although my experience with IWBI and the Well Building Standard dates back a few years before that, where I was supporting the education programs at IWBI from my perch at USGBC. IWBI and the U.S. Green Building Council enjoy a long-standing partnership and a lot of goals and visions in common. So I've been familiar to the team, but I'm only about 6 months into to my work at IWBI.
Where is the team, the IWBI? Where are they located?
Well, we're a global organization with outfits that are popping up all over the world, but our headquarters are located in New York City.
And what was the reason for the starting up of this group? Was there a you've got the LEAD program, USGBC, you work closely with them, I see. Was there a need that people thought wasn't being fulfilled?
Well, I think that the need was being fulfilled, but there was an opportunity to really accelerate a conversation and market transformation toward healthier spaces, toward buildings and communities that really put people first. At IWBI, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, the heroes of the green building movement, many of them who have been engaged with the U.S. Green Building Council. USGBC pioneered, along with that movement, some of the earliest progress as it relates to health and wellness in buildings, daylight and outdoor views, active design, improved air quality, enhanced materials. But as the terminology implies, the true north of green building, is really about planetary health. And at IWBI, we saw an opportunity to shift a conversation to be more squarely focused on the people who reside inside of the buildings. Now, of course, if you've worked in any of these related fields, including IAQ fields, you know that the relationship between planetary health and human health is inextricable. So I think it's a repositioning of a conversation and a deepening of a commitment, because IWBI and the Well Building Standard introduce a variety of aspects of human health in the built that can be influenced through the built environment that traditionally haven't been touched upon, or at least not in a deep way through green building standards like LEED.
And as I understand the standard, the well building standard, it appears you encourage people to work both in the LEED program or the Better Living or other programs along with this well building standard. Is that accurate to say?
Absolutely true. We strongly encourage project teams to seek dual certification, and a lot of the work that I'm doing in my new position as Chief Product Officer is about deepening the incentives and streamlining the effort of pursuing dual certification across green building rating systems like LEED or Green Star or BREEAM in combination with WELL.
And what is your role as the Chief Product Officer? That's a new title for me.
It probably sounds a lot like what I think that it is, which is I oversee all of the products, the product development and evolution at IWBI. Of course, our core product is the Well Building Standard, the certification for healthy buildings. And I also oversee all of our education programs and products and some of the new initiatives that we're working on to advance human health in the built environment.
Okay. I'm glad I clarified that, because I thought for some reason it had to do with the products that go into buildings, but it's the products of the IWBI.
Correct.
And you've had a lot of experience in developing online training programs in the past. Is that a big focus of the IWBI?
Well, it's a big focus of today's learners, so it has to be a big focus of IWBI. Today, the majority of learners across the globe not only learn online through digital pathways, the majority of them are learning from their iPhones and from their tablets. This was a major shift in education that we've seen over the last decade. So in order to reach our core customers and our core champions where they are, we've got to really think about how online education platforms can support their learning goals.
Well, let's talk a little bit about who those core customers are and the core champions. First, how many people or how many buildings are currently certified through the Well Building Standard, and how many are in the pipeline?
So we launched WELL in October of 2014, and since then, 25 projects across the globe have achieved WELL certification. There are 350 projects that are in the pipeline, encompassing 76 million square feet of real estate in 27 countries.
And what countries do you get the most interest from?
Well, of course, we've seen a lot of uptake in the United States, but some of the other places where we're seeing well really grow quickly in popularity are some of the places in the country with the poorest air quality, like China and India, for example. We see there that, whereas well is like a vitamin here in the United States, well is an aspirin in a place where, you're seeing things like particulate matter rise to extraordinarily dangerous levels, where we're actually seeing, air quality as in direct connection to mortality and morbidity. And so I think those are the places where we'll see the demand for well increase steadily. Because we know that that at the end of the day, what you want the most for your family, what you want the most for your employees, is to create environments that are conducive to their health and happiness.
I want to get into the standard in a little more detail, but I have one more kind of background question. I was reading. I didn't get through all 250 pages, but I scanned quite a bit of it. In fact, all of it. But it's pretty extensive, and it's well referenced, which I found very encouraging, because it's good to see all those references at the back. But I noticed in the front end that the IWBI is a public benefit corporation whose mission is to improve human health and well-being through the built environment. What, if you could explain to listeners and me, what is a public benefit corporation? That's kind of a new term as I understand it.
Yeah, it is. A public benefit organization is a for-profit company, but with altruistic intentions. And at IWBI, we have pledged to devote 51% of the profits from certification, from well certification, to the greater good. So it's a newer model for businesses to really aim for. That intersection that is so familiar to the green building movement. We call it the triple bottom line, where people, planet, and prosperity meet in the middle.
Okay, and Rachel, let's go into a little bit more on the standard itself. Can you tell us a little bit about how it was developed and like I said, we already have LEEDS programs and others. How it was different from these other programs?
Well, as I said before, the primary difference is that well really puts people at the very center of decisions related to building design and operations. When we think about a building, the greatest expense are the people themselves. The greatest expense of a business is the investment that we make within the people. So well seeks to really put people at the very epicenter to make to create a framework that guides decision making that really leads to environments that optimize everything from productivity to and performance to healthy sleep cycles and improved personal health outcomes.
And I think there's 7 different categories essentially that the standard looks at. You've got air, water, nourishment, light, fitness, comfort, mind, and innovation. I'm not sure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I guess innovation, I don't know if that's one of the standard requirements or if that's an optional thing. Can you talk to people a little bit about how the standard is set up? There's a baseline, I guess, and then there's some additional options for people.
Yeah, exactly. So you named our 7 core concepts for building performance, plus 1 additional category for innovation. Think of those in your teacher background as like extra credit or bonus points that really encourage projects to go deeper and to explore new practices and new opportunities for driving human health in buildings. Well is made up of more than 100 features. Those features then break down into what we call preconditions and optimizations. So in this first version of well, in order to achieve certification, you have to meet all of the preconditions, and then the levels of achievement are determined by the number of optimizations that you achieve above and beyond that baseline. So if you meet all of the preconditions alone, you're awarded a designation of WELL Silver, and based on the number of optimizations that you achieve from there, you can earn WELL Gold or WELL Platinum. We ask that all projects undergo a multi-phase documentation and performance verification process. So that includes a third-party documentation review that is performed by our partners at the Green Building Certification Institute, the same organization that does third-party reviews for LEED certification, as well as a number of others. And then something that makes WELL unique from other certifications, particularly green building certifications at present, is that it requires an on-site performance verification. So somebody who has been trained by GBCI, called a WELL assessor, actually shows up on site and collects air samples, collects water samples, performs various site checks, tests acoustics, does calculations and measurements related to daylight, et cetera, to determine that the building really is performing as it is intended.
And how often is that performance verification required?
Well, it's a one-time deal for your certification, provided that you that you meet all of the required thresholds. And then recertification is an event that takes place every 3 years. Of course, our aspiration, like so many in the movement, is to see certification start to progress to more of a real-time series of measurements. But due to technology limitations right now, in relationship to, for instance, to sensors that are able to calibrate these things, that technology is evolving rapidly. I'm amazed at how quickly it's evolving. But right now, we treat certification as a moment in time. The aspiration is to get to a place where we can really evaluate performance ongoing and in real time, and even move away from the need to have the people on site collecting all of those samples, collecting all of that information. We know that with smarter buildings and smarter technologies, we can get to a place where we can really understand a lot of the building's performance, day to day and even minute to minute. And that's something that IWBI is deeply invested in. Is market transformation has to engage the manufacturers of these sensors, the manufacturers of these building information technologies, in order to get us to a place where we truly know that every day when we walk into the building, every day when we lay our heads on that pillow, that we're going to, that we're showing up to work, live, play, eat, sleep, worship in places that don't get in the way of our health, and at best even enhance it.
I noticed that also there is some required, I believe it's required, correct me if I'm wrong, paperwork essentially documenting that certain things like filter changes have occurred, inspection of the mechanical system, the coils, etc. Did I get that right?
Yes, exactly. There's a very rigorous documentation process that's required for WELL certification. That's part of that first phase, third-party review conducted by GBCI. And then there's the second phase that tests for the performance of the building with somebody who's actually there on site conducting the measurements and performing the calculations.
And if building owners don't continue along with the program, they lose that certification. Is that accurate?
Correct. I mean, we don't come and take the plaque off of the building, but the market does understand and will increasingly understand that certification is a designation that lasts for 3 years, and at that point, you've got to demonstrate through our recertification process that building continues to perform. Because, as I'm sure you know, a building is really only as healthy and only as green as the way that the occupants, the way that the facilities management, the way that employees are engaging with it.
And I think that's been a criticism of some of the other programs that have been around for longer than the WELL standard. I assume that the group took that into consideration when they were developing this new standard and said, hey, we're going to make sure that there's continuing documentation and maintenance, et cetera, to keep these buildings working the way they were intended?
Definitely. I think, the whole movement is headed in that direction. But I'll tell you that IWBI has a big advantage, which is that the founder and CEO or former CEO of USGBC, the creators of LEED, now has come on board as the CEO and chairman of the International Well Building Institute. So, for myself, having put in 10 years working for Rick Fedrizzi at USGBC, and now having come to work for him at IWBI, I think we have an advantage in the sense that we know a lot about what's made LEED so incredibly successful, but we also know a lot about where we wish that we could have done it better, faster, more impactfully, and we get to apply those things all over again. It's really kind of fun to be working in a movement that's so closely related on a product that's so integrally connected, but with a lot of knowledge about how we can do it better this time around. And I think that we would be thrilled to be as successful and to transform the market in the kinds of ways that LEED has been able to do. I think we're hoping to be able to channel all of the great lessons that we've learned at USGBC and apply them this time around to a slightly different objective.
I noticed the 7 preconditions, I guess they are well, no, they're not preconditions, but you
concepts. Yeah.
The concepts: air, water, nourishment, light. But it doesn't include energy. And I know there's been, criticism in the past of some of the green building standards that they don't necessarily perform better energy-wise. And I know energy performance isn't necessarily a wellness issue, except it is a wellness issue for the planet. And I'm wondering, where's energy in here? Or if it's not in there, was it decided not to?
It is a wellness issue, actually, as you point out, for the planet and also for people. We're on the verge of releasing the first pilot edition of our Well Community Standard. And so when you think about, starting to apply human health practices at scale, energy and its direct tie to, for instance, CO2 and air quality, you start to realize that the health of buildings and the health of people are, completely inextricable. You can't separate them, right? Because let's say I create a building and it's an incredibly healthy building, but it has a really high energy footprint. Everything that building is pushing out into the atmosphere is something that I or my neighbor is breathing in. And that's really why we've thought deep and even are seeking deeper alignment between these green building rating systems and WELL, because we understand that these things have to go hand in hand. Because in terms of our long-term sustainability as people and planet, we've got to be working in, one unified system to take care of one another. So, WELL does touch upon energy in a variety of ways, mostly through the air concept. But when used in combination with green building rating systems, you can really create a building that balances, some of the priorities that building owners have for conserving energy, for instance, and reducing CO2 emissions and enhancing human health. And it turns out that those things really can be done in concert. Just last night, I was at the first WELL and LEED certified office space in New York City, Cook Fox Architects, where they successfully achieved LEED Platinum and WELL Gold. And you can really see how all of these concepts work hand in hand with one another. But that energy health nexus is one of the most important conversations that we can be having right now, because all of the decisions that we make have to take into account sustainability at a local level and sustainability at a planetary level. And
let's talk a little bit about what types of buildings are currently covered or can be certified through this standard. You currently have a few and you're adding more. If you could tell listeners a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, version 1, the version that's currently out in the marketplace, was really optimized developed primarily for commercial and institutional office buildings. But the well features can be applied across a variety of real estate sectors. And we have pilot versions of the standard that are currently in place for retail, for multifamily residential, for education projects, as well as restaurant and commercial kitchens. But we also recently adopted a new strategy, a strategy that's helping us to bridge toward the next version of the well building standard, which will launch in the first quarter of next year. We call that approach all projects in. And in essence, we now have the ability to work side by side with project teams to do well certification for any building type, save single family residential, which will come down the line in 2018. And so today, projects of all varieties are working toward well certification. We've got some warehouses that recently registered. We've got some new school projects that have come into the pipeline. Senior living, which is a sector that I'm really excited about. So at this point, well certification can be applied to any building, with the exception of single family homes.
It seems like you've got, how big of a group of people currently work at the Well Building Institute, the International Well Building Institute? How many? What kind of staff size do you have?
Well, it reminds me of USGBC early days. I was around the 60th employee, but when I joined the team, there were 35 new positions posted. We, in fact, at IWBI welcomed 3 new members of the team just this week. I think that our head count, because it's hard to keep track of it right now, is somewhere around 25 people.
Okay. And obviously, at least I'm doing a little quick math here and certifying the number of buildings you have at this point, that you're not paying for yourself. At least I don't think so. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. So were there investors that put money into this, or were there foundations? Can you tell us a little bit more about that structure?
Yes. Well, a lot of the initial funding came from our founders directly, from Paul Scialla and his brother Pete Scialla, who were very successful and leading a division at Goldman Sachs. Paul got inspired by a LEED certification that was happening right outside of New York City, one of the Goldman Sachs buildings. But he thought, where are the people in all of this? Where's the focus on humans in all of this? And that kicked off about 6 years of dedicated research, convening a variety of experts to see, is this something that's feasible? And from there, they were able to inspire a number of other investors to get along. You were asking earlier about the nature of the for-benefit organization, and I'll tell you, this is one of the benefits as compared to working for a nonprofit, that we actually have capital to get this business off of the ground, whereas, in a nonprofit, you're looking at probably a decade of living hand to mouth. And so this has allowed us to really gear up all of our efforts from product development, through sales, to really attempt to create a transformative force in the market. At USGBC, I oftentimes referred to LEED as a kind of tickle me Elmo of sustainability. Everybody wanted to know how we became so successful, but nobody could quite put their finger on it. And I think USGBC saw its biggest growth in a time when there was a tremendous amount of money pouring into buildings, particularly commercial real estate. Mm-hmm. And so it was a special time in history. And of course, USGBC had a special idea that really took off. But in the last 10 years, we've seen so many well-intentioned rating systems that are pushing sustainability and attempting to drive sustainability into different sectors beyond buildings. And we've seen a lot of those organizations and those rating systems really struggle to reach that tipping point. And so it's been really interesting to start to do work in a for-profit model where we really can identify those early investors who are willing to devote funds toward this dream that allow us to get a running start.
That's very interesting. It's and that kind of seems to be a trend. You have the public-private coalitions working together on all kinds of things. I would imagine you still work with, and correct me if I'm wrong, do you have interaction with like the National Center for Healthy Housing and other similar groups?
Yes, we have many partnerships with nonprofits and associations who are have been leading in the space of human health and leading in the space of buildings for years. We have a variety of ways in which we interact with experts and organizations that have within them deep expertise and thought leadership. In fact, on the subject of air quality, in the coming months, we'll be standing up an advisory for air that's made up of many of the most important influencers and experts who can advise us on how to take the standard forward. So, yeah, we depend upon those partnerships and in many cases public-private ones to get the insight that we need. You called it, we're a 25-person shop thereabouts. And so just like USGBC has relied so heavily on volunteers and other advisors who have lent their brain power, their enthusiasm, their passion to make LEED what it is today, so too does IWBI rely upon a very diffuse network of experts and practitioners and early adopters who are willing to put the time and effort into making well successful and making this movement really take off.
All right. Well, what I'd like to do is we're going to break for our halftime. We're going to thank our sponsors. And when we come back for the second half, I want to dig into the standard a little more and particularly the sections that, our listeners are more experienced with and they do practice in air and water a little bit, and then a couple of the other sections. And we'll be back in 90 seconds with today's guest, Rachel Gutter, Chief Product Officer at the International Well Building Institute.
IAQ Radio would like to thank our association sponsors. The Indoor Air Quality Association, a nonprofit multidisciplinary organization dedicated to promoting the exchange of indoor environmental information through education and research. Visit them at iaqa.org. Particles Plus, engineers and manufacturers, feature rich particle counters, air quality monitoring, instrumentation, and vacuum pump technology. ParticlesPlus.com. Count on us. Gray Wolf Sensing Solutions, who use advanced sensor software technology and embedded computers to provide superior environmental test instrumentation. Visit them, wolfsense.com. IAQ marquee sponsors are John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at johndon.com. That's JONDON.com. Healthy Indoor Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions are available at IAQ.net. Legends Environmental Insurance, the experts in insurance for environmental consultants and contractors for over 20 years at legends-enviro.com. That's legends-enviro.com.
Okay, we're back. The second half of our interview. We've got Rachel Gutter with the IWBI International Well Building Institute. We're talking about the well building standard, and Rachel, I had a little trouble. I had a question here about the indoor air quality requirements of the standard, and they're kind of mixed in with these the air, water, nourishment, light, fitness, comfort, mind, innovation. They're kind of all over the place. But I wondered if you could comment just generally on some of the most important indoor air quality requirements, and then the opportunities, I guess, is the other or optimizations that are available in the standard.
Sure. As you well know, and I'm sure as pretty much all of your listeners know, the most fundamental component of our health is the air that we breathe. And we know that poor indoor air quality can contribute to conditions from asthma to allergies to upper respiratory disease. So the Well Building Standard has a number of features that aim to create optimized indoor air quality to support the health and well-being of building occupants. So within WELL, we expand upon the requirements set by the EPA regarding the duration and concentration of various pollutants, including carbon monoxide, lead, nitrogen, dioxide, ozone, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, and we incorporate standards from other agencies, not just in the U.S., but for projects who are pursuing certification across the world. We reference their local standards as well. And we also, of course, rely on evidence-based best practices from industry organizations. So yeah, you see aspects of IAQ that cut across a variety of WELL concepts. But the majority of them are located within the air concept. And I would say that the hallmark of the WELL program is the testing that we do specifically to gauge indoor air quality that happens through the on-site performance verification that I mentioned earlier in the program.
2 weeks ago, we had Ed Light. He's a certified industrial hygienist, actually out of the D.C. area. And he was talking about a new AIHA white paper on VOCs in, new buildings, testing of VOCs in new buildings. And I didn't get a chance to talk to you about this before the show. Are you familiar with that white paper at all?
I am familiar with that white paper. USGBC's resident technical genius and my good friend Brendan Owens, who's the head of LEED at USGBC, passed it along to me over dinner the other night. I was like, oh, great, thank you, late summer reading. But yes, I am familiar with that paper, and I'm pretty excited about it.
In what way? I mean, is it going to change the way you think the organization maybe looks at this VOC testing?
Well, I definitely think that it could. I mean, look, you outed me earlier in the show as being a former school teacher. I was an English major, and so I know enough on these subjects to be dangerous. But we really at IWBI, we rely on a much broader base of experts through, for instance, the advisories that I mentioned were in the process of standing up, and the advisors that we relied upon heavily for the 3-phase peer review that looked at the first version of WELL. So, will it directly impact us? I suspect that it will, but I'm going to be convening a group of 15 experts, practitioners, WELL users, and air quality specialists to take a look into that paper and help us to make some determinations about what its recommendations have to say to inform the WELL building standard. Now, a lot of the things that paper points out are things that actually have already been addressed within the WELL building standard. For instance, that paper talks about the difficulties in testing indoor air quality when the building first opens, because of course we see that things like volatile organic compounds decrease dramatically after the first couple of days and months of operation, and WELL requires that the building be operational and occupied before we come in to do that performance testing. That paper also points out an issue with looking at TVOC, and recently in our efforts toward the ongoing improvement of the standard, we released what's called an alternative adherence path. So basically a new pathway for achieving WELL certification, in which we allow projects to look at 19 discrete VOCs rather than a blanket total VOC limit. Those levels are based on the California Department of Health the California Department of Public Health Standard Method version 1.1, which is derived from California's chronic reference exposure levels mentioned in the AIHA paper. So, what the reason why it excites me is because I just get giddy every time one of these studies helps to move us a step forward. I think about where we were 10 years ago using averaged VOC limits, and I think about what a heavy lift that was for the building industry, how difficult it was to track down the products that met those requirements. And now you can walk into your local hardware store and buy a zero VOC paint and safer sealants and adhesives, for instance. So I just see that there's so much progress that's happening right now, and I feel a real a debt of gratitude for the scientists the physicians, the researchers who are really pushing that agenda forward and helping us to deepen our understanding and to drive better protocols and better technologies. Because right now, I think, the testing that we do for on-site performance verification, it's only as good as the technologies that are available. So we're, using the best technology that's out there. But there are still some challenges, and the testing is still quite onerous. It's quite time-consuming. It requires us to ship samples off to a laboratory. And as I said earlier, I really look forward to that day when our buildings are smart enough to know themselves how they're performing, particularly around air quality.
Well, we're getting there pretty quickly, actually. It is a great time to be a part of this. I'm wondering, you mentioned, we talked about some of the preconditions and, some of this being a heavy lift. Which of the preconditions is the toughest for building owners to meet, if you know off the top of your head?
Air quality, actually. It's being able to pass the tests that we administer to meet the required thresholds for air quality around particulate matter and volatile organic compounds. And I would say that the second most challenging feature to achieve within WELL has to do with circadian lighting, given that is a pretty new field and a pretty new set of protocols for measuring a building's performance as it relates to circadian lighting.
And which is the easiest? I mean, which one do building owners pretty routinely, handle nowadays without really being urged to?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not sure that any of them are easy, but I am really excited that some of them are becoming just part of the way buildings are designed, built, and operated. They're increasingly accepted best practices. Commissioning was seen as a new expense and requirement when LEED first launched, and now I think you'll seldom find a building, at least in the United States, that doesn't go through a commissioning process, because the movement works so hard to demonstrate the return on investment for testing to make sure a building is built the way you intended for it to be built. Another example of where we've seen market transformation happen here domestically, but also increasingly in other places across the world, is with universal design and ADA, and at least ADA is how we'll reference it in the United States. We require that building projects meet ADA requirements. And while you might say, well, that's, what is that? That's just meeting the law. What I say is that's actually one great example of where a policy can actually transform the market. And why is ADA requirements still important? Well, because so many buildings outside of the United States are not built to those requirements, and therefore, neglect a segment of the population whose health is just as important as the health of any of us. So, are those easier? I don't know if they're easy, but I think that the people who fought so hard to put those requirements into place wouldn't say there was anything easy about it, but they have become increasingly part of improved best practices that the green building movement, I think, has really driven into the mainstream.
I've got a text question from a listener. I'm not sure how you're going to answer this, but it's about the IAQ component of things and how the tests are administered. So a third party comes in and does this testing, and I didn't see it anywhere in the standard, but I'm sure, I went through 250 pages pretty quickly. Do you refer them to a specific test protocol for, let's say, for instance, the total VOCs of less than 500 micrograms per cubic meter? Can you talk a little bit more about how that is done? And if it's beyond what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. We do have very rigorous protocols and requirements for the technologies that are utilized. That testing is done by a network of qualified well assessors who are either employees of the GBCI, our certifying partner, or are designees trained and designated well assessors who have gone through that rigorous training and who have demonstrated their ability to collect accurate results. So the protocols they're very specific, and they're also evolving because, as I mentioned, new technologies are coming into our field, and also certain technologies that perhaps weren't as accurate in the past are increasingly becoming more accurate. So our air quality testing revolves around collecting samples that get sent off to a lab to be evaluated. We still are not convinced that, for instance, some of the handheld devices that claim to be able to assess particulate matter give us accurate enough results to be tied to a certification event.
Okay, that was actually, you anticipated my next question here, and that was on the PM 2.5 and PM 10. It looks like those are not something with a handheld meter. You're going to actually require something like what's in the NIOSH compendium, or do you know off the top of your head what the requirement is on that?
I don't know the specifics of it, but yes, we do require that 500 microgram per cubic meter, for instance, for VOCs be met, and for particulate matter, we also have very strict thresholds, and all of those calculations or all of the performance metrics are being derived from samples that are collected and shipped off to laboratories, which are also carefully hand-selected by JBCI.
And I've got another text question about the protocols. Where do we find those? I didn't notice them myself in the standard. Is there another section of the website that has the specific testing protocols?
Sure are. There's something called a performance verification guidebook that makes transparent all of the protocols that we utilize or that GBCI utilizes to conduct the assessments and award or deny certification.
Okay. And then we will get...
And all of those are free downloads. So the standard as well as the performance verification guidebook are available and in the public domain through wellcertified.com.
And regardless of your level of expertise, you're a certified industrial hygienist, whatever, you still have to be a lead or a I forget what you call the people that do
assessor.
the assessor. Yeah. Because I guess you want them to know the specifics of what's required by the standard. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I mean, as I understand it from GBCI, the training that you have to go through is quite rigorous, but more importantly is the rigor behind the quality control. So well assessors are shadowing current well assessors and then are having their results carefully reviewed, particularly in the early days. And so right now we do have third parties who are being approved as well assessors. Our intention, along with GBCI, is to create a global body of well assessors, and even to launch the well assessor as a kind of professional credential in the market, so not just to support well certification, but to go, more broadly be able to offer these services to building owners across the world. We're just beginning to certify buildings, right, over the last couple of years. And so we're pacing the training and accreditation of well assessors according to the demand for well certification. But I will say that we have had an abundance of interest from qualified firms who are interested in becoming a well assessor. And we, along with GBCI, will be ramping up those trainings to teach people about the protocols, how to conduct the measurements, and ultimately to move them toward becoming fully qualified and vetted well assessors.
I know it's tough to say, but what kind of demand do you see for that in the future? I mean, we've got a lot of listeners that do indoor air quality consulting work right now. They're fairly familiar with most of these testing protocols. What's projected with respect to buildings that will be certified in the next, let's say, 5 years?
Well, I think that you're going to see a significant growth of demand, of course, for well certification. But above and beyond that, I think that what you're starting to see is a growing demand across building owners and even consumers and homeowners for understanding the air quality within their spaces. And so, I was just talking to somebody who has a grandmother in China who has a device in her house, and she knows how to conduct the measurements to identify what the particulate matter looks like in her apartment at any given time. The demand is being driven by the challenges that we face with particularly in cities with air that is more and more polluted and more and more detrimental to our health. So, from an industry standpoint, how do I think that the demand will grow? I think it will grow exponentially because I think that but I'll also say this, that the practitioners right now, the well assessors, the firms that can conduct this analysis are vitally important, but so too is the technology. And so I think that there's that it's really critical for practitioners who are conducting this testing to really be a part of defining that technology and creating more demand for better better instruments and better devices that help us to really truly understand in real time how our buildings are performing.
I see one of our listeners just checked, and you do carbon monoxide, PM 2.5, PM 10, ozone, method of measurement, all parameters, direct reading instrument. I'm not sure what he meant by that, but the total VOCs by a TO15, and formaldehyde does the ISO standard. Okay, very interesting. Let me point out what I thought was an interesting and I think encouraging portion of the standard here. And it was on the filtration, and that one of the following requirements, actually it's in the standards for particulate matter and inorganic gases. Carbon monoxide has to be less than 9 parts per million, PM 2.5 less than 15 micrograms per cubic meter, PM 10 less than 50 micrograms per cubic meter, and ozone less than 51 ppb. And if you use a demand-controlled ventilation system, it regulates the ventilation rate of the outdoor air to keep carbon dioxide levels in the space below 800 ppm measured at, and they tell you where it's measured at. And then, I think it's in the same section, they talk about one of the following requirements is met: a MERV 13 or higher media filter, project demonstration that 95% of all hours in a calendar year, etc. And then you have an option, though, and I think the standard feature is the air filtration maintenance, and then you have an option to record the air filtration maintenance, include evidence that filters have been properly maintained as per the manufacturer. It seems like in just about every area, you give people an option. And I think that's important to mention for listeners, that it's not always just strictly you must do X, Y, or Z. You've got some options.
Correct. I mean, we really aim to make the standard performance-based as opposed to offering prescriptions, although sometimes in absence of performance-based strategies, we do offer a number of prescriptive pathways. But to your point, we try to offer multiple options toward achieving the same intent. And I expect that as we work toward the next version of the well building standard, that you'll see an increasing emphasis on performance as well as increasing options for achieving more prescriptive pathways.
Another good example of that is the cooling coil mold reduction section. And if you use mechanical system for cooling, you must meet one of the following requirements. One is ultraviolet lamps are employed on the cooling coils in the drain pan, or you have to have a building policy that states that all cooling coils are inspected on a quarterly basis for mold growth. And it seems like a pretty common sense approach to it. I like that part of the standard. The mold inspection section, I think we could beef that up a little bit, but certainly we could talk more about that after the show. Then, there's exterior liquid water management. It covers everything.
Thank you. Yeah, we do try and cover everything. I think a lot of the sections in well could be beefed up, but that is the challenge with market transformation. You're always trying to balance, what the ideal is versus what the market can take on. And when we put something out there and it's, and it goes too far, the market lets us know. And we learned that lesson time and time again when we were at USGBC, and we're learning it all over again here at IWBI. When you have a market transformation vehicle like well, you sometimes cannot allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. You've got to bring people along that journey because at the end of the day, this is still an optional certification. There's no one requiring you to do well certification. And so, I think in some instances we recognize there could be more stringent requirements in place. But the question is, would the market be able to rise to meet it? And so that's the constant dance that you're doing at an organization like IWBI, and that's why it's so important that we consistently raise the bar on what it takes to be a well-certified building, but to do so in concert with our users and in concert with the industry.
I've got another text message for you real quick. I've got the president of the Indoor Air Quality Association, John Lapotere. He's a regular listener, and he said that they would love to work with the IWBI, and hopefully we can make that happen, because they've got a really good pool of talent that does this type of work on a daily basis out in the field, and I think it would be a great combination that we might be able to
Absolutely. Our door is always open to folks who want to get engaged, particularly those with deep technical awareness and expertise. We're going to be working on what we call the Well Masterclass series, deep dives into all of the 7 well concepts. And so we're looking for partners who can help us on both the content as well as the circulation of those important educational offerings. So maybe the AIR Masterclass is a place where we could do some good work together. And as I also mentioned, for any of your listeners, we'll be convening a series of advisories that cut across both concepts as well as building types. So advisories for all of our concept areas, including air, water, light, nourishment. You named all of them earlier very well, and also for building types and sectors. So if folks are interested in getting involved, there is an expression of interest form on our website, wellcertified.com, and perhaps we can work with you to also post the direct link through your site, so that people know how they can register their interest in having a direct relationship with us moving forward.
Absolutely. We'll get that in the blog. Let's go to the roundup, John.
Move 'em on, hit 'em up, move 'em on, hit 'em up, rawhide. Cut 'em out, ride 'em in, let 'em out, cut 'em out, ride 'em in, rawhide.
Okay, what we do normally here is just ask a final question or two thing. Here's the big question for me. I'm just curious, what is the best estimate of what the International Well Building Institute says this participation in this program is going to cost a building owner?
Well, I think that right now we're seeing a number of projects already, even in these early days, who are reporting a $0 premium in order to achieve well certification. Of course, it depends to some extent on what your baseline of design would have been, but we see that and that's not even in terms of long-term payback. That's $0 that are required, to supplement a project's existing budget in order to be able to achieve well certification. And then, of course, we think that the payback is incredibly significant. Just the well fees alone can be covered by reducing sick days by just 1 day or even half a day for all of your employee base. So I think that it's a very small price to pay. If you look at the expenditure that the average company has on wellness programs and the abysmal rates of utilization of those wellness programs, and then you compare that to any of the fees or expenses related to where it requires no active participation per se by employees, but rather passive participation by simply showing up in the building and participating as an employee. That line item starts to look pretty negligible, I think. And so we're not only in conversation with building owners and with facilities heads, but also with HR personnel who really see this as a much smarter expenditure of dollars with a much greater success rate in improving human health outcomes, particularly productivity, which is really where all of your true financial gains are going to be realized in a business context.
And before we go, I had several other sections I wanted to ask you about, but we're running out of time. I just want to let listeners know that, there's a section on air filtration maintenance, on cooling coil mold reduction I mentioned, mold inspections. We've got exterior liquid water management, which I think would be very important and interesting. And they do use the EPA moisture control guide quite a bit throughout the document. There's interior liquid water management, condensation management, material selection and protection, air leakage testing, relative humidity, air sanitization. That's one I really, hopefully we can do another show sometime with either you or one of your other technical people there and talk a little bit more about all these topics. But Rachel, before we go, is there anything you'd like to add, anything I missed, or anything at all?
No, this has been fun, but you've done a great job, Joe. You really, you've done a better job probably than I of explaining the standard. So maybe you should be one of our new headcount at IWBI. We're accepting new talent all of the time.
Well, we can talk about that.
But in all seriousness, we do have a new indoor air quality specialist who will be joining our team in August, and it would be great to set up a time when he could, talk TVOCs and particulate matter to you in the grittiest of details. So I hope that we'll stay in touch and set that up for the next time around.
Great. When is he joining you?
August.
Do you happen to know who that would be, or?
Yeah, but I can't tell you yet, so you'll have to wait till the summer.
Oh, I thought I might get it. That's all right. This is Radio Joe Hughes saying thank you so much to Rachel Gutter, the Chief Product Officer at the International Well Building Institute. Great show. A lot of nice comments from our listeners. We'll be back again next week. We don't have things quite lined up for next week, but I want to thank my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick, at the controls, John. You gotta have faith. Most importantly, our growing group of loyal listeners. Please come back and join us next Friday at noon for the next episode of IAQ Radio.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.